My name's Stephen Archer. I'm a surgeon, and the kind of surgery that I do mostly is bariatric surgery, which is surgery for morbid obesity, for weight loss, for dealing with some of the issues related to that. And so you'll see throughout this there'll be some information about bariatric surgery, as well as information about carbohydrate addiction and just our relationship to food in general. So the way I like to do these talks is if a question comes up for you, just raise your hand, and I'll hear the question, repeat it, and answer it if I can, or say I don't know, which I guess is an answer to. So my goals here are to tell you a little bit about the problem of morbid obesity, and then go through some of the evidence related to some foods as addiction foods, and talk about how the model of addiction works in thinking about treating problems like morbid obesity. So, for at least 2 decades, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta has been keeping track of statistics about obesity, which I always found interesting because the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, tracks epidemics. And certainly in this country, morbid obesity has been identified as an epidemic disease. An epidemic means that it's spreading somewhat out of control and pattern. So there's a series of maps that they've made in which they've tracked people with body mass index indices or obesity basically over the course of years. So this is a map from 1994, and you can see the dark blue means that those were states with about 15 to 20% of the population overweight or obese. Does that make sense? So you'll see that as the colors change, that there's a change in obesity trends through the country. 20% started to appear by 1997. By 2000, and then we see a new color added here in 2003. More than 1 in 4 people in particular states were overweight or obese. Is this a surprise to anybody?
No.
We've heard about this, right? We've seen this happen over the course of time. It's in the news, right? Something happened with this problem over the past 2 decades. It's gotten much more common. Over 30% by 2007. 1 in 3 people. Now, does this mean that all of a sudden the whole country lost its willpower? Do you think that's true? I don't think that's true. I think something's happened. Something's changed in the way we relate to food. I think part of it has to do with the food supply, right? And how we relate to that. And we'll talk about that. Here we are by 2010. See Oregon? Not everyone's an Olympic athlete, right? Okay. So you can see this change. This is dramatic. I mean, this is, if we saw this, and we are seeing this now with diabetes, these same kinds of maps can be drawn for diabetes. The percentages are not as high, but the trends are the same, and they affect every organ system from your eyes to your feet. This disease of morbid obesity. Okay. Not only is the epidemic of obesity occurring, but there's a trend for even greater BMI patients. Who knows, does anyone not know what BMI means, body mass index? It's a relationship between your weight and your height. So it accounts for, if you're 6'4" and you weigh 250 pounds, it's way different than if you're 5'4". And the body mass index is a way to account for the height difference. But you can see people with BMIs greater than 50, and these are people, very high risk patients. The rate of those patients has gotten even higher, faster rate for those people. And that means the epidemic has a high end that has really taken off. These are not people that need to lose 10, 20 pounds. These people usually need, they're 100 to 150 pounds overweight. All right. So if 30% of the population is overweight or obese, and now we know that Oregon children for the first time are expected to have shorter lifespan than their parents. And this is not because of drugs, sex, rock and roll. This is because of morbid obesity. This is not because of tobacco. It's not because of cancer. Morbid obesity has been found to be the responsible deal for this. And this has never happened before. And you can read the rest of these things, right? Every year, 37,000 more Oregonians become overweight or obese, with quite an incredible price tag. This finally is getting people like the government and insurance carriers interested in the problem, because it's costing a lot of money. This kind of got cut off. Since 1970, we've doubled our consumption of soft drinks, okay? Anyone have a guess as to how many gallons of soft drinks the average Oregonian drinks in a year? More or less than 20?
More.
More or less than 30? More? More or less than 40? Yeah, it's 50.
Wow.
50. So everyone's responsible for their gallon a week, right? Don't let us down. So this is how much morbid obesity costs. 9% of an increase in spending for anything within medicine is astronomical. I mean, if you think about just a gauze at the hospital can cost $2, you know, multiply that by the millions of dollars being spent on this issue. Okay, so how did we get here? This is a story I often tell, but it's because it's a telling story. So when I was a kid, my dad's a retired gynecologist, OBGYN, and he used to take me into the hospital to make rounds with him. And on the way to the hospital, I often remember him stopping for a cup of coffee at the, whatever it was, 7-Eleven. I think it was called Maverick Stores where I grew up. He would walk in and he would pour a cup of coffee and put a little cream in it, and it was, you know, a cup of coffee, 8 ounces, and that was it, right? So what's a cup of coffee now? It's a whole meal, right? This is what a cup of coffee looks like now. You go to Starbucks, and before you know it, before you know it, you've consumed 430 calories of sugar, right? This is not 430 calories of green beans here, right? Is a calorie a calorie? Are all calories created equal? So if you eat 430 calories or drink 430 calories of sugar in a cup of coffee, that's a real different experience for your body and your brain, which is starting to get us into this discussion about carbohydrate addiction. Your brain sees this 430 calories way differently than it sees 430 calories of a whole meal. All right. So if this is how we now define a cup of coffee as compared to what it was 30 years ago, you can see how multiplying this over the course of a lifetime, over the course of many meals in many different fast food restaurants. Don't have any illusions. All right, Starbucks sells coffee, but it's a fast food restaurant. It's processed food, and a lot of it's sugar. All right, and sugar is the bottom line when it comes to how your brain gets addicted to something. So within medicine, addictions are a controversial topic already. You know, it took the American Medical Association many years to define addiction as a disease. Morbid obesity wasn't defined as a disease until a few years ago. Carbohydrate addiction is even less commonly referred to within medical circles. But I'm going to show you some evidence that carbohydrate addiction really makes your brain act the way other drugs do, like cocaine. We'll see that in a minute. All right, so there's this, I want to talk about this. So I guess this is, part of this talk was used in a medical situation, but part of the issue here is genetic, all right? So I've talked about how the food supply has changed a little bit over the past 30 years, right? McDonald's has it in their head they want you to eat there at least twice a week, right? That's part of their marketing deal. Now, most people don't, but I'd say if you're eating there twice a month, you're on a knife edge, right? Okay, so there's the way the food supply has changed, and then there's our genetic makeup, all right? Some people have genes that allow them to be skinny no matter what they do, right? And some people seem to gain weight kind of no matter what they do. And there's also a population of people that are in this kind of two-hit theory about diseases like morbid obesity that also applies to diseases like cancer. There are some people, for instance, who smoke their whole life and never get cancer, right? And there are some people who get cancer easily, and part of the reason for that is they've added smoking to a genetic difference between them and the other people. Does that make sense? So if you add highly processed carbohydrates to somebody who has a genetic predisposition for obesity, that's the two hits. They come together, boom, you have a real problem. Does that make sense? You can say no. You're nodding. Okay, that's good. Nodding's good. So then there's this third issue of how active we are, right?
Great picture.
Just the fact that they would put put this, I mean, maybe this is a doctor's picture, I don't know. All right. So our activity level has changed over the past 40 or 50 years. I know I spend a lot of my day sitting looking at a computer. I'm trying to look at you over the computer usually. But even when I operate now, I sit down and I operate with a robot. I'm not even standing to operate. So that's changed my activity level. I used to stand for 10 hours every Tuesday. Now I sit. That's a difference. And that's happened across the country. We are spending more time doing less stuff with our bodies. And in between the times where we're doing less stuff, if we're adding processed carbohydrates and sugars, processed sugars, into sedentary time, you can see how the hits are adding up, right? So this is kind of the origin of this epidemic. It's, in medicine, we call it multifactorial because there's multiple factors. So a lot of people come to see me and they say, why me? And then I go through this. Maybe there's this genetic predisposition. What's your relationship to the food supply? What's your relationship to being inside your body and moving it? Does that make sense? All right. So then this is the stuff that drives people to the energy program, to seek people like me out. All these other things start to happen, right? Cancer, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, arthritis. All right. So at various BMIs, with a BMI greater than 40, you can see, that's the red one. These are people who have, for sure, a diagnosis of morbid obesity. You can see how much higher the prevalence is of any one of these diseases. The prevalence means what is the percentage of a population that has a disease at any given time. So how many people right now with a BMI of 40 have type 2 diabetes? 26%. That's a lot. That's a lot. And this stuff drives people to try and figure this thing out. Make sense? So some of this is part of this other talk where I talk about bariatric surgery and so I'll just mention it. The resolution rate of some of those problems is remarkable when somebody changes their metabolic rate and they change their weight, basically. 82% of patients can be free of diabetes. High blood pressure drops and it becomes normal again in about 70% of patients, etc. And people live longer. So if you take 100 people and you follow them over 5 years, and some remain morbidly obese and some lose weight, in this case through bariatric surgery, the risk of dying drops to less than 1% relative to this group, where the risk of dying was 6%. So the long-term success of strictly just saying we're going to cut calories and we're not going to look at your relationship to what those particular calories are. Let's just go on a diet, right? How many times have you been to the doctor? Maybe not so much recently because we're becoming more educated, but just reduce your calories and see how you do. And the success rate of just calorie reduction is less than 10% for sure. It's more like about 2%. And in those patients who say, I'm just going to starve myself on 500 calories a day and stay hungry all the time, it just doesn't work in the long run for most people. Does that make sense? Even this guy, who's got some serious issues now going on in his life, lost a lot of weight, but also this article, his new weight struggle, even after he had lost all that weight, with the whole team, right? So, what we eat, this is some photographs of a week's worth of food in various places around the world. So this is kind of a Mediterranean diet. This is probably the kind of food that anyone wearing a white coat would want you to eat. Also, your mom would want you to eat this, all right? Lots of vegetables, lots of whole foods, lots of whole grains. Very little in this picture is in a package. You see that? When I meet with people and I tell them, do you want to know 2 things to do? Buy food that's not wrapped in anything, and buy food that isn't white, right?
They have taters,
They do have potatoes.
but they're brown.
Look at the ratio of those to the rest of that table. Okay. This is hard to even see, right? These people are calorie restricted, fairly high carbohydrate load, but really that's it. And believe me, this is an active life to fill these 3 bags every week. All right, this is us.
That's disgusting.
Okay, that's an average. And I didn't take these, but I thought it was a great idea. Is to ask an average family, get a week's worth of food. All of the majority of this is processed. Even the stuff that looks real comes in a box. There's a problem with that, right? If you just cut this down and you're still eating this, not going to work. Your body will get extremely hungry. The hormones in your body that drive hunger will go through the roof. And that's why people who simply cut calories have such a hard time staying on a diet, is because your brain secretes more of that hormone called ghrelin because it thinks you've run out of food. And it's telling you, go seek food, right? Okay. Questions? This isn't new. So far, I bet I've told you not one thing you don't know already. So the addiction cycle, this is a graph, or a chart, sorry, that we would use if we were going to talk to someone about cocaine addiction or about narcotic addiction or whatever. There's 4 steps to it, right? So the acting out is the using, right? So as we're doing this, I want you to think about anything you use in your life to check out. I don't like feeling bored. I don't like feeling angry. I don't like feeling anything, whatever it is. What do I use to check out from life? People who smoke have this cycle. People who do drugs, people who are addicted to processed carbohydrates have this same cycle, okay? So you can just reflect in yourself, is there any area in my life, if I were to break it down, that this cycle would fit? So when someone acts out, whether it's cocaine, whether it's whatever it is, if they were to have a feeling about that, often it involves acting outside of their value system. And what feeling comes with that often is shame. Like I've acted outside my value system and I feel badly about myself. Maybe I even believe I am bad. Maybe this has happened so many times that this feeling doesn't even come up anymore, but it's on its way. And then the thing that gets a person out of feeling this badly about it is they start thinking about checking out again. What do I do in my life that helps me to not feel feel badly about myself? So for instance, somebody with, I have lots of patients who have shared with me that they will eat in secret. They'll go through the Wendy's drive-thru, and before they get home for dinner, or if they're going out for dinner with friends, they do this secret eating, where they'll go through the drive-thru, pull into a parking space, and eat a Wendy's meal. I'm just thinking of this one person. And after that meal, all the trash goes in the trash can, right? Everything's empty, everything's gone, and that person then heads home for dinner, having had this episode first. Feel badly about that, eat a tiny dinner, because they feel badly about this acting out, and then start fantasizing again about this. And the ritual comes in, and for this person it was getting in the car, telling herself, oh, I need to go to the store for milk or whatever. Something would come up, and on the way to the store, back to the Wendy's. I've had people who do this with a bag of Cheetos. I've had people who do it in a wide variety of ways. Cocaine addict, or let's say a heroin addict, they've got the needle in, pull the needle out. I can't believe I just robbed someone to go buy that heroin. Feel awful about it, start to withdraw. Fantasy. The fantasy actually kicks in the chemicals in the brain that make you start feeling better, called dopamine. And because the use diminishes the level of dopamine, you need more of the chemical kicking out. And then it starts this ritual again. So breaking through addiction cycles, what was that show on TV where they would talk to people, or they try to get them to go to treatment? Right? Intervention. The reason it's called an intervention is that this cycle needs an intervention somewhere, right? Somewhere to stop this process and allow the person to see what's going on. So loss of control, compulsive intake, and then withdrawal, consequences, and this whole deal is driven by a brain chemical called dopamine. All right? So what about dopamine? Obesity versus cocaine. If you take cocaine addicted, how am I doing on time? Okay, we're doing good. Cocaine addicted rats will choose sugar over cocaine, is what this slide is showing. These are PET scans this is confusing. So that's meth. This should say cocaine. Sorry. If you do PET scans, which are brain functioning scans of what parts of the brain are firing when a person takes a drug, people who do who have no methamphetamine or cocaine in their system have very different looking brain scans than people who do, all right? And this is a scan that's looking for those dopamine receptors, all right? So you can see that when we do brain scans on people who have been morbidly obese versus controls or non-obese people, these look a lot like these, right? So this is what the experiment, the scientists who did this, they wanted to see how do those brains compare. And then they took rats that they had addicted to cocaine. They gave them all the cocaine they wanted. And then they put, instead of cocaine, they put cocaine plus super concentrated sugar water, like way sweeter than what they would need for nutrition. Plus they gave them all the free water they wanted and all the food they wanted, all right? And the rats switched reliably from cocaine to sugar. So, that's not to say that maybe there's something in a rat that just likes something sweet. But a rat will kill itself for cocaine. If you get them addicted to cocaine, and then you give them all the cocaine they want, they'll take it till they're dead and they won't eat. But if you switch them to sugar, they'll then go to the sugar preferentially. Also do that until they're dead. Does that make sense? I showed this to a room full of doctors, about 150 doctors, to say to them, look, your patients with this problem are dealing with something real, right? What's going on in their brains is that their feel-good hormones, their dopamine levels, are dropping. And this isn't some deal where it's just going to be willpower, like gut through it and eat less calories. This is a long process of changing the relationship of the brain to food, right? Not all food. Carbohydrates, processed carbohydrates. This doesn't work with Brussels sprouts. Right? If you give them unlimited access to Brussels sprouts, their brains look just fine. And I never have a patient come into my office, never once have I had a patient come in and say, it's the bacon. I just can't stop eating the bacon. They may eat a lot of bacon, but when I start talking to them about what's driving you in your eating behavior, it is always carbs. Carbs mixed with something, but whether it's crunchy carbs, bread, pasta, processed sugar, right? All that stuff's derived from that white food I was telling you about, either sugar, flour, etc. So, and then when I start saying to them, you're not addicted to food, you're addicted to carbohydrates, it actually can be freeing. Because often people will say to me, if you tell me I'm addicted to food, how am I supposed to live? I have to eat 3 times a day. So I've stopped saying it's food addiction. It's addicted to this. Alcoholics are not addicted to drinking. They're addicted to drinking alcohol. There's a lot of things they can drink. You just choose not to drink alcohol. And as they choose every day to do that, their life changes because they have changed their relationship to the thing that's harming them. And they're asking for help because now they know what the problem is. It's not just all of it, it's not everything, right? They can drink orange juice, they can drink watermelon juice, they can drink all the Coke, they can drink their gallon of Coke a week if they want, right? So for patients who are dealing with carbohydrate addiction, it's the same thing. Can you identify the things that trigger you? And these are the things you can ask yourself. What is the food where if I start eating it, I don't stop until it's gone? Right? And that's going to be a good indicator. If a cocaine addict gets in a room with lines of cocaine, they don't leave 2 or 3 undone, right? They do them all. It's like that joke, how much cocaine do you do? I do it all. So it's all gone. The same thing is true about, if Cheetos are your food or chocolate chip cookies are your food, and you know that if you're in the room with them, they're going to all be gone. You can start thinking about that. Think about these experiments. Something real is going on in your brain. It's not just a willpower issue. Does that make sense? Probably have hammered that to death. So from a physiologic standpoint, this is science mumbo jumbo, what it means is that the receptors that receive the dopamine, which helps us feel okay about life, those receptors are diminished in obese patients, obese people, carbohydrate addicts, I guess is a better way to say it, than compared to non-addicted people. And that's pretty clearly shown. You can take the BMI of groups of people or rats and you can see this curve goes down. This shows the same kind of thing. This is the receptor concentration for normal dopamine, which again is that hormone that helps you feel okay. It's the hormone that if you don't have it, you start looking around for medicine, all right? Whatever that medicine is. Meaning, I want something to help me feel better because I'm edgy. For addicts, edgy is a serious issue. They get super edgy. It's called craving and withdrawal, right? That's ultimate edginess. That withdrawal, that craving thinking is being driven by a lack of dopamine receptors in their brain. And they get worse the more they use, right? Because it drives down, they get so flooded with the drug that the receptors say, oh, you don't need much of us anymore, there's so much of that around. So the cocaine or the sugar or the narcotic causes floods of this chemical, and then the receptors for that chemical get so flooded they say, oh, we don't have to be here so much, so that, then they drop, and then you need even more to get to normal, right? So this is what happens when someone gets the shakes in the morning, they're withdrawing, they then start using to get normal. All right, so one of the problems with carbohydrate addiction is that people don't often find themselves under the Burnside Bridge in Portland looking for carbs, right? Like they associate addiction behavior and poor decision making with ending up with these called, you've hit your bottom, right? So the question is, what does it take to get a person who is carbohydrate addicted to their bottom? Like the bottom means, I am done. I am sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm going to reach out for help. I'm going to get myself better understanding, and it's going to be one day at a time, right? That's the model that addiction treatment is centered around, because it's so hard to imagine a lifetime of never using that drug again because the edginess is so hard, right? But over time, abstinence from the drug creates healing in the brain. Literally, these receptor numbers start to go up. People start to feel somewhat better about themselves. They get help from other people. That connection is called love, right? Love starts to make these receptors appear more. It's really healing on that level. So the deal with carbohydrate addiction, how does it differ from this? The only thing I can really see, and I do this a lot, is that it's harder for people to understand that it's going on and that they really are at their bottom. It's pretty easy when the police are crashing through your door and you have a needle in your arm to think, maybe this is out of control, right? But if you're just sitting at home with the hidden food or the hidden M&Ms behind the computer, it's hard to see that that's your moment, right? Until it is. So I encourage people to know this and then say, choose when your bottom comes. Can it be now? Can it be today? Can today be your day? And then there's all these resources, this energy program, bariatric surgery for some people, whatever it is. For addicts, the pathway to healing is, I will do whatever it takes because I'm tired of dying. Does that make sense? All right, so it's kind of just a shift. Am I going to live today or am I going to die today? Binging is kind of it's an interesting topic within this carbohydrate addiction because it kind of incorporates a lot of these things, and it's very common among morbidly obese people to they kind of grit their teeth. All right, it's like someone who's not going to use any drug. I'm going to grit my teeth, but I'm not really going to do the other work to get well, and then they'll be abstinent for a while, and then it's big time binging because this kind of craving or some little thing just sets them off, and off they go. Happens with all drugs. And the reason I have this up here is to remind me to say again that this is like any other addiction. And I wrote this talk to a bunch of doctors who don't believe it, right? So I was giving them more and more evidence. But if you're here, you may already know this. Okay, here's the definition: eating until uncomfortable, eating large amounts when not hungry, eating more rapidly than normal, eating alone, disgusted, depressed, guilty, anxiety about that, and then reusing again. Obviously, if you were to put Percocet in here instead of food, you can see the same patterns. Oh, I'm not going to talk about that. That's too weird. All right. Palatable foods. Let me see what my next slide is. Yeah. Okay. So, here's the deal with this thing. The people who are selling, the dealers for food out there, for carbohydrates, know all of this addiction stuff on some level. Some of them know it really well. They know what makes your brain say, yep, that's awesome, right? And they are highly aware of these hormonal things. Leptin is the hormone that makes you feel full. Ghrelin's the hormone that makes you feel hungry. And they design foods. They don't cook foods. If you're eating at Applebee's, you're eating a designed meal. It was not cooked in the sense that someone went to the farmer's market and said, what looks good today? What grows locally, right? There's a person in Kansas wearing a white coat that looks a lot like this and not like a chef's jacket. And they are thinking about how to combine foods so that you do one thing, and that's eat more of them and come back to Applebee's to do it. That can mean injecting the chicken breast with hormones or not hormones, but chemicals, sugar, water, things to make it look more plump, have more of a chicken taste, respond better to the grill marks that they put on them in Kansas before they ship them to the Applebee's here and reheat them on the grill. All of those things are going on to try and get us back in, right? So these are the dealers for this disease, for carbohydrate addiction. Processed fast food, all right? And they make the foods incredibly palatable. They are super, like the feeling in your mouth, they understand how your tongue works, how your tongue starts to respond to the food, how it's interacting with the sugar-fat combination. They know all of that. And they're making foods, and that's why it's really different to eat a meal at one of those kinds of, eating a McDonald's meal is very different even than eating a hamburger at home. Here's the chemistry behind that. I will not bore you with that. Suffice it to say that when you feel hungry, there are hormones causing that. And if you have the disease of morbid obesity, you have more hunger hormones, okay? And you have fewer hormones that say you're full.
Why can't you just take drugs that fix that then?
Yeah, why not?
No, I'm serious. Why can't they make a
I'm
drug
gonna
that
answer
says,
you.
okay, I'm not hungry?
Because it doesn't work quite that, I know you're serious, I believe you. It doesn't work quite that easily. These are the ones we know about. We also know there's about 200 others that all interact. So when we just give someone ghrelin, it acts in such a short range from where it was made in the body that we can't get it where it needs to be just by taking it by mouth. It doesn't work that way. But I do know that patients who have carbohydrate addiction, morbid obesity, have way more of these hunger hormones than the normal population. And if you were a group of doctors, I would say to you, would you hold it against a diabetic because they're not making insulin or because they don't respond to insulin that is in their body? And the answer is no, they don't. But for morbidly obese patients, they somehow think that even though these hormones, which are incredibly powerful in driving behavior, they somehow still blame you for this problem. Get out and do more, get out and eat less. Well, if you eat less, this is going to go up even more, and even more than it would in a person who's not obese. The physiology is all screwed up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. If you've been in this experience of yo-yo dieting, then you know what this feels like. Let's skip that. All right. So back to this deal about palatable food. This looks like food, but this is, like I said, highly processed food, right? It's edible. I don't know that I would actually call it food, right? There are lots of things that are edible that aren't quite food. Pick up a box of Captain Crunch. Pick up a box of mac and cheese. Read all the things. Ask your 5-year-old, do you know what any of these things are? They'll say no. I have no idea what BHT is, and monosodium glutamate, and high fructose corn syrup, right? Take them over to the meat counter and say, do you know what chicken is? And they'll say yes. then that's food. Okay. What's in here looks like food, but this is highly processed food. And this is how many calories are in this. And believe me,
Wow.
this is an appetizer. This is sold as an appetizer. Okay? You can't
For
get
20 people.
you can't get 2,000 calories in a plate of real food without, I mean, you have to really work at it. Right? This is processed food. I read a book about this. Sorry. Oh, we keep doing it. Coming back for more. So this is where I end up on that two-hit theory. I don't know that I can change a person's genetics, right? I know that bariatric surgery can change their hormones, how that hunger full thing works. But generally, the food supply is unsafe. And if you're here at this energy, if you're a part of the energy program here, part of what's going on for you is that you are retooling your brain with respect to what safe food is. And that is a gift, you know, that you can't, I mean, it's worth every penny, because what we're being told is food and what we actually believe is food, a lot of it is unsafe for human consumption. All right? So it is really, really true that knowing where your food comes from, knowing who your farmer is, buying local, eating green food, eat meat, eat whole foods in good combinations makes a huge difference. The fuel you put in this body matters. Eating this stuff, all the stuff on those menus at Chili's, whatever, is not the same as eating locally sourced food, or even if you can't buy local food, buy food that you know the names of, that doesn't come in a box, okay? Buy the best, highest quality food you can buy and eat that every day. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I don't care how many calories you eat. I don't care at all. If you're eating real food, your body will start to sort that out. You may need some direction, you may need interventions, you know, along the way. You may need something to get you going in that process. But it will change your life to eat real food in whatever amounts sound good to you every day. Your body will figure it out. This is a good book that has some of that data I was giving you. Taking Control of the Insatiable American Diet. Sorry, there it is, The End of Overeating. It talks about the difference between this and this, right? People think they're eating a carrot. Okay. So that's the difference there, right? Eating out. This definitely, this addiction cycle applies. No, I'm not going to talk about that. Actually, I think we're probably, I'll just take, this is a picture of an office where I see groups of patients downtown, in which we talk about carbohydrate addiction in a group setting, similar to how someone might talk about that at a Overeaters Anonymous or other kinds of things. What you're doing in the energy program, if you're a part of that, is checking in with someone, being accountable, learning new things, retooling how your brain kind of thinks about food and how it's thinking about how you use food or don't use food for energy to check out, etc.
But you're right there where Great Harvest Bread is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Towns's is pretty good.
All right, who has questions?
Well, I understand what you're saying about eating real food, but if you get into one of those carbohydrate addiction states, what hints do you have for getting yourself out of that?
Good question. So the question is that she understands what eating real food might mean, but if you get yourself into one of these carbohydrate binges or eating cycles, what do you do to get out? Well, you prepare for the relapse before it occurs, right? So relapse prevention in addiction models has to do with looking for cues that are going to be important for you to know when that's coming up. So having accountability on and right at hand. I don't know how much you might or might not know about people who go on that courageous journey through things like AA, but those people have a list of phone numbers with them. All right, when they're trying to get clean, they have a list of phone numbers with them, and if they start to get to where it looks like they're going to be feeling edgy, they're on the phone. Like, it's happening right now. I'm screwed up, and I need, I want to drink. If people could view this carbohydrate issue the same way, they would carry a list of phone numbers of people who understood, who got what they're going through, and they would pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm at the Wendy's parking lot right now, but I haven't gone through yet. Now, that may sound funny unless you're one of those people with that disease, and then it feels like, wow, that could be a lifeline. They get hooked up with other people who are learning to eat differently. They start doing things differently. Even if they don't have a lot of money, they'll go to the farmer's market and just learn about food, or buy a little something different that they hadn't tried before. Learn to cook in a different way. Set up patterns so that the brain starts to understand new things about behavior. How could eggplant taste good? How do you make eggplants so it tastes good? That whole process of buying an eggplant, reading about it, learning about the plant and how it, the food, starts to change the way your brain thinks about food. I took a group of patients to a farm and did a dinner with them. And we walked out to the farm and we picked the food, and my wife is a chef, which is good for me. And she prepared that food straight from the plant to the table. And a lot of people had no idea, what a broccoli looked like prior to getting to the grocery store shelf. It's really helpful just to relearn everything about food. And then if you find you are in it, it's not the end of, it doesn't have to be the, chuck it. You can stop. You don't have to stay in that behavior forever. You can ask for help again. And then tomorrow, if it happens again, you ask for help again.
So the only thing you don't want us to eat is processed carbs. You still want us to eat healthy carbs.
Yeah, I would say, so the question is, so you said, what do I want you to eat, and not want you to eat processed carbs, but what about healthy carbs? There's a huge difference between healthy carbohydrates. For instance, quinoa is considered a carbohydrate. Whole grain rice is a carbohydrate, meaning it has sugars within it. The difference is that, let's use an apple as an example. I have no problem with you eating an apple, because no one's ever come into my office and says, Doc, I eat 20 apples a day. It's getting out of hand. But I do have people who come in and say, I'll say, what do you drink? And they'll say, I can easily drink a half gallon of apple juice, right? And that's just sugar. The difference is the apple has fiber that makes those sugars be released slowly over time. And you don't get the same kind of a rush that you would with just drinking apple juice. So even things that you think might be, this doesn't seem so processed, apple juice is a processed food. Should you never drink it? No. I mean, I'm not saying that, but, as often as you drink anything else, it's, a huge sugar load. It's empty calories. The stuff that makes the apple, kind of what it is the fiber that allows, it gives it sweetness, but then your body can manage it. When you eat straight sugar, your liver gets less involved in terms of slowly using that to give you energy. It tends to store it as fat right away because it gets overloaded.
In terms of whole grain foods, you go to the grocery store, 95% of it is in a box of some kind. Are there cereals or things like that that are less processed or not processed? Or
Well, shredded wheat is shredded wheat. There's not much else in it, as far as I know. I think that's the only ingredient.
Just prove oatmeal and things like that?
Yeah, oatmeal. Yeah. So there are ways to. What I would say is look at the list of ingredients, and if there's 50 of them, it's not going to be. It'll be more processed than if there's 5. Even ice cream's a processed food. It's definitely full of sugar. But there are ice creams, you can buy ice cream sandwich from Costco that will not melt. Did you know that? I saw a video, because I look for things like this. There's a video of an ice cream sandwich, and the guy puts it out on a deck in 80 degrees sunlight. 3 hours later, it is still an ice cream sandwich.
What is it?
What is it?
Paste or what?
Is it like
not ice cream.
The list of ingredients was like, it's not ice cream. There's no cream in it. Yeah. So it comes to you cold. It looks like an ice cream sandwich, but it won't melt. Maybe it was Walmart. Costco is the largest purveyor of organic food in the country. They sell more organic food than anyone. All right, other questions? Okay.
What about gluten-free?
What about gluten-free? So the issue with gluten is not necessarily an issue having to do with carbohydrate addiction or morbid obesity, but it's more about how your body manages one of the proteins in wheat. And so, I think for people that are gluten-free, they should avoid, or gluten-sensitive, they should avoid gluten. I mean, it's pretty simple. Not easily done, though.
It's really hard.
It is hard.
Yeah.
Yep. Easier when you reach out and get connected.
We talked about the dopamine receptors. Is there maybe in a sense, like a healthy high that instead of like addiction-wise, like drugs or with the food, that you can kind of still get that sensation, maybe with like exercise or I don't know. if there's anything.
So the reason you feel good, like a runner's high, people who, they're not just dopamine, but there are other hormones that are acting both locally, meaning very near where they're made in the body and throughout the body that help us feel good. Dopamine's not the only one. But yeah, there are lots of ways to get that good feeling. Exercise, I mean, people, after sex, people feel good, and that's all hormonal. It's not magic. Exercise is another one. People generally, people, for instance, who are gluten sensitive that then start to eat without gluten definitely have a feeling of well-being. And people who eat clean, eat whole foods the way we're talking about, over time, they're not going from 9 to 2 with their food, meaning they're emotionally, wow, I'm freaked out and I'm happy, I'm totally jazzed on sugar, I'm at 9, and then an hour later they're at 2, like, I feel like crap, and so I better start looking for 9 again. You can live between 7 and 3. So people tend to live like that instead of, and they feel better about that. Okay, well, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.